Welcome back to my channel, guys. It's your girl Aza or Aziza. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. If you are a returning subby, welcome back. If you guys follow my channel, you guys know that I love reading, and I love reading so much more than just like watching movies, TV shows, etc. It's really my form of escapism and my form of entertainment. So every year I like to do my book review, and these videos really don't get a lot of views on my channel, just being real with you guys, but I thought I wanted to share with you all my 2024 books and review. Grab a drink. This might be a long one, and also to make it go a little bit faster, I always recommend watching this in 1.25 speed, so that way, you know, it goes a little bit faster. So let's get started. So I'm gonna grab my drink here, and it was really funny because I was trying to do an aesthetic little section and I spilled my drink, but I have my Waterloo here, my sparkling water. So for a quick background overview, 2024 I read a total of 21 books. So yay, I read one more book than I did in 2023. I am happy with that number. I wish, of course, I can read more, but in reality, I can't read more than I already do because I have a full-time job, and then I have 3 children. I also have a husband and, you know, have a life, right? So I do try to fit in reading as much as I could, and also not to mention I also do like content creation, which also takes a lot of time from like editing perspective. So I am really happy with that number, 21 books in total. I think the game changer for me too is listening to the audiobooks. Sometimes I don't really like to listen to audio, I prefer reading, but listening to audio really helps me go through books faster as well, and it makes me feel like I am doing something with my time. So I do really recommend audiobooks. I love audiobooks now. I'm always reading or listening to an audiobook, and I also read physical books at the same time. So that is the game changer for me. Also, one thing about me is with the books that I read, I try to read a little bit of everything. Like, I'm not gonna read fantasy only, I'm not gonna read romance only, I don't read nonfiction only. I just read a little bit of everything. That's just kind of like the reader that I am. And some of the books that I read may be new to me, but may not be new to other people. And I really just read, really depends on like how I'm feeling at the time. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with book number 1. The first book that I read was actually a book that I read on my Kindle. I'm gonna put a picture over here, but it's called A Slow Fire Burning by Paula Hawkins. And you guys, I love this book. This actually wasn't really something that I had in mind. I just purchased it because it was on sale on my Amazon tablet or Amazon Fire, my Kindle, it was on sale, and so I've been seeing that book being featured multiple times. I figured, like, you know, let me just go ahead and buy this. I didn't even read the synopsis or anything like that, so I just went in blind, right? And I was pleasantly surprised. So this book is essentially about a guy who was eventually murdered in his like houseboat, and it's a story about like who murdered him, right? And then with a good murder mystery, there's always like the parallel characters that's surrounding the main plot, essentially, that is going to tie to the why and like the how and everything. And I really thought that it was so good because I remember when I was reading through this book, I couldn't figure out like who killed this person. So the author did a really good job at like underlying a few different suspicious characters without being too predictive in a way. So it was very much like a surprise for me, and I really enjoyed this book. So surprisingly, I gave this book a 5-star. I really enjoyed it, and if you are into like a murder mystery type of book, I definitely recommend. Also, this book is not really is not set in the US. It's based in London, I believe, so it's also really interesting because I'm really into like British culture, English culture, Brits, UK, etc. So I really enjoyed reading this book specifically. All right, so the second book that I read is also, or was also on my tablet, and it is called Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. This book was so cute. Also a pleasant surprise. I did not pick this book. I actually read this book through my book club, and so that was the pick for the month, and I went in blind. I didn't know anything about this book, and I really loved it. I really loved it. This story really talks about this character. She's a mom, and she's kind of like eccentric like character. She's not like everybody else, and she has her daughter. She has only one child, and she's married to this guy, right? So they live, I believe, in the Seattle area. Both like the husband and her are like they have high flying careers, is what I remember from the book. And then she kind of like moved to this new area because like her husband, I think, got a job for like the tech company there. I want to say it's Microsoft or something like that. She had like a hard time like blending in with everyone, so that's why she was seen as this kind of like eccentric like character, right? And her daughter, you know, went to like a really privileged school, and she was trying to, you know, really get to know or like be more involved in the school more than she is. But she found different things, and let's just say she was not really the favorite, right? And then all of a sudden, she goes missing. She's gone. And so they were all trying to figure out like where she went. And so they had this whole trip planned out. Has this whole trip planned out to Alaska with her family, like her daughter and her husband. And she one day just like up and left, and like her daughter was actually the one who basically was trying to find her. And they found a whole trail of emails that she had sent out to her virtual assistant. So this woman, like I said, she is like a very anxious character. So she has a virtual assistant that she writes to about everything, who's located in India. So think about like your call center. So she writes to this person about like her worries and like all the things that she assigned this virtual assistant to help her. And so basically the daughter was trying to like figure out like where her mom went through the help of this like the email thread that they have. So it was really interesting. Definitely something that I've never read before, so I really enjoyed it. I do recommend it. It's such a wholesome book too, because it's kind of like a family dynamics, and I honestly just really enjoyed it more because of the wholesome relationship between the mom and the daughter and such. So yeah, it was really good. I think for that one I gave it a, let me see how many stars. I thought it was good, but I thought it was a little bit dragging in some parts, so I gave it like a 3.5 star, but I thought it was pretty good. All right, so the third book that I read is Make Your Bed, and it's an audiobook, so I listened to this book. So it's called Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World, and it's by William H. McRaven. He is a military personnel, I think, and it's a really short audiobook. I believe I gave this, let's see, yeah, 4 stars. So nothing too crazy there, but I did remember liking this book a lot because it was like straight to the point. It talks about like how making your bed in the morning is a great way to build healthy habits, and I really just enjoyed like the lessons that were taught in this book. So for that one, nothing much really to share. If you are looking for motivation, or if you're trying to become better at like stacking healthy habits, and if you're looking to be more productive and more disciplined in general, I do believe that this book has some key nuggets that can help you out with staying motivated. So I definitely do recommend checking it out if you haven't already, because it is a short read. So definitely not a lose-lose, but a win-win there. Fourth book that I read is The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. You guys, I loved this book. This book was so good. This is actually not my first Kristin Hannah book. The first Kristin Hannah book that I read was probably back in 2022. And the first book that I read was The Nightingale, which I loved as well. I was very pleasantly surprised. Again, one thing with me is when I go into books blindly. I just go off of like what I see on social media or like online and such. But I don't really read like the synopsis or anything. I do glance a little bit, and then I just kind of go in blind and see how I like it or not. So I really enjoyed The Nightingale. It was such a good book. I cried like a baby when I read that book. And then I was thinking like, you know what, I'm gonna give this book a try because I've seen this like everywhere as well. But I would say that this is the more underhyped book of Kristin Hannah's, and I feel like this book is even better than The Nightingale. Can you believe it? Like, I actually like this better than The Nightingale. It is so good. So if you guys didn't know anything about Kristin Hannah writes a lot of like historical fictions. This whole book was set in Texas in like the 1920s, right? So during this time, there's this woman, she was married like really young. She kind of got pregnant really young by this guy, and she wasn't really like, she loved this guy, but I feel like the guy didn't really like love her, right? But she basically was exiled from her family because of her mistakes, right? So she left her own family, who were pretty much well off, to go live with her in-laws basically. And so during this time, Texas, they had this huge drought for like, I don't know for how long. And the story is about the drought and how they survived during really dry months, like no water, like everything was dying. Like think of like a completely barren land, okay? One day her husband just decided to like up and leave them, okay? Just left her with the kids and his parents in the house and just left them. And it was just so sad because like her whole life is just so depressing. Like she's just trying to live, trying to survive, taking care of her kids, taking care of her in-laws, who are now like her own parents because her own parents disowned her, and they're all living through this drought, right? So she has two children too. Her children, the first one does not really particularly like her because she always felt like the mom was the problem and was the reason why the dad left them. So you can see that there's that tension there between her relationship with her daughter's relationship, that her husband left them basically and said that I'm gonna go out west because everybody's going out west to find jobs, etc. So I'm gonna go there, and he never really like reached back out to them. So one day she took her own liberty to relocate herself and her children out west. And it was just this like crazy migration story basically from like Texas through out west, and it was just so sad, you guys. Like it was really sad, and in a way I really felt a lot of like feminine power through her. Like she really left like her roots, and she had to make sacrifices with her in-laws, took her kids to rebuild her life completely in a new place. So over there she had to learn to do a few things, like how to drive the car and all these things, like how to set up a place where they couldn't all like stay. They didn't have money. So think about this, like it's just this really desperate times, right, where like everyone was fleeing Texas to go out west for better jobs. So then once they got to out west, then there's the challenges there. There's like no place to live, no jobs, right? So she had to kind of deal with that, deal through that. And then there's just this whole like situation that happened out there too, and how she became kind of like the quiet girl, the reserved girl, the dutiful wife, dutiful daughter-in-law person to this woman who's empowering and motivating and strong, powerful. And she was in a position when she was out west being that voice for a lot of her people, and it was just so inspiring to see that. So such an amazing book. I'm not going to tell you what happened, you guys, but it kept me crying the entire book. It was just so sad. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend it because you're not going to regret it, you guys. It is so good. I think this one, I read it in like 2 days. And one thing with me is like when I read a book, because like I said, I have all these responsibilities and everything, it usually takes me about like 1-2 weeks to read a book. It takes a long time. But you know, with this one, I was just so glued to it. It was just such a page turner. Really enjoyed it. 5 stars. I think I told you guys I read 21 books. I actually read 20 books. I didn't read one more book compared to 2023, but I read 20 books. But anyways, the next book that I read is The 5 a.m. Club. Own Your Morning, Elevate Your Life by Robin S. Sharma. So this book has always been on my TBR for the longest time. I finally got it. I did listen to an audio version of it, and as much as I liked the book, I hated the audio version. So if this has been on your TBR, I recommend not to read or listen to the audio version. Or maybe you might like it, but for me personally, I did enjoy it because the author's voice was just kind of cringy, and like the storyline of the book is cringy to me in a way. Let me elaborate. This book was written, it's a self-help book, I guess like a motivational book, right? Because it talks about how to be part of the 5 a.m. club. So it's amazing content, don't get me wrong. I love the content of the book. It's just that the way it's being structured, it's being told in story format. So instead of saying like, hi, this is like principle number 1, do this, and like lay out the story and the lessons and stuff, this one talks about a whole, it's like a storyline, okay? It's like there is this guru who was giving a motivational speech about life, right? And this guru all of a sudden like passes out on stage, and then somehow 3 people were recruited and they all were transported to this island, okay? And this island, they found the guru who passed out on stage, who looked like a homeless man, was actually a billionaire person that owns this island. So this billionaire person was basically giving them like his first-hand lessons on how to become successful just like he is. And so there's that, like, I think, is it 3 people that he recruited or 2 people that he recruited, and basically he was enriching them with his lessons in a story format. So it's kind of cringy in that way because it talks about this whole like story about it, and the fictional story about it. I just would prefer if it's just like, okay, these are the facts, like these are the lessons, that's it, no cringy storyline. But if you take that aside, it's a great book. You know, it has a lot of good information on here, and I was really motivated after I listened to this book because, like I said, it just has great teachings in here. So I did rate that one. That one was hard for me to rate because I listened to it and I really hated the narration. It was super cringe. So because of that, I think I gave it like a 3 because of the narration. But if I take the narration out and just think about the content itself, I would say it's like a 4.5 stars. See, I have a little bit of a reservation there because the storyline itself is just so cringy to me, but the actual like context and the content of it is amazing. So that's that. The next book that I read, I think it's book 6 now, is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. So this book was also a book club read. I really enjoyed this book. I actually borrowed this book from the library, so I don't have it with me to show you guys, but this book was so cute. It is my first, or was my first, actually it wasn't my first, it's probably my, no, it's my first supernatural romance book. I've never read this genre before, and I was pleasantly surprised. Okay, so this book is about a girl. She's an author, right? She's actually a ghostwriter, so she writes books for other people. And she basically had an encounter with a man in one of her hometowns that she grew up in. So she had to go back home because unfortunately her father had passed away. And it was really interesting because her father was her family owned a funeral home, right? So she's always been this supernatural person. She's always had supernatural encounters with like spirits and stuff ever since she was a little child. So she could kind of see into like the other dimension, and she could kind of have a connection with them and talk to them and see them and all of that. So that's really interesting. And then secondly, she's also an author, so she writes books, right? So she meets this guy who is also an author or a publisher, one of those two. And this guy is like somebody that she's met like just in passing in the past, because they're in the same industry together, very good looking. So they kind of found themselves in a situation where like, ooh, you know, they really are liking each other and such. But there is a twist there. There is a twist, and I'm not going to give that part away. But yeah, it was really cute because it talks about the two of them like falling in love and stuff. And I found it really interesting because there's that supernatural, like other dimensional piece as well that's kind of like infused in it. And with any great book, to me, there's always like a great wholesome sort of dynamic in it too. And this one comes from the family perspective, like her dad, I think her sister and her mom, you know, how they all like were planning for like the funeral and stuff. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. I think for this one I rated it pretty high. Yeah, so for this one I rated it pretty high. I gave it a 4 stars, so I definitely do recommend checking it out if you want to try, or if you haven't tried reading supernatural romance. I really do recommend checking it out. Okay, so the next book that I read is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. By the way, I just found out Christina Lauren is actually 2 authors, not 1. I did not know that, so that was interesting. But yeah, I really, really loved this book. I think I also rated this one pretty high. I gave it a 4 star. This is not my first Christina Lauren book. The other book that I read was Love and Other Words, I think. That one was a-okay to me. I really liked the cover of that one too, but it was like pretty predictable for me. For this one though, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was super cute. Such a great like summer read if you haven't read it already. So basically this one is talks about the character, the main character. Her name is Olive. She's always the unlucky twin. Oh yeah, because she does have a twin. So she's always like the unlucky twin. She's always like falling, she's always doing things. Her life is in shambles, right? So she went to her sister, her twin sister's wedding, and at the wedding she actually got lucky because everybody else got food poisoned at the wedding but her, and her twin sister's husband's best man, who is a person that she hates, right? So both of them ended up not getting sick, and so they had the tickets that were already purchased for. By the way, her twin sister is the super lucky one. She's always winning contests and everything, and like her wedding was basically paid for because she was always winning contests, right? So they had these 2 tickets to go to their honeymoon, but because the bride and groom were sick, they gave those tickets to Olive, the unlucky twin, and the brother's best man. And this is an enemy to lovers prose, so you can kind of like figure out like what happened there. They kind of like fell in love with each other, and it was so freaking hilarious. Like, I love this book. So definitely a cute little summer read. There is a part in there that talks about like how there's a part in there when they were on honeymoon that made it like really awkward between the two of them because they really hated each other, but that one incident kind of like led to the other, and then they kind of found themselves like falling in love. And yeah, it was just so good. So if you have not read it yet, I definitely recommend. I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave this a 4 star. Okay, the next book that I read is over here. It's The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. You guys, I also noticed that this year I actually did a lot of reading on my Kindle, a library book, or even audio. So I didn't really spend a lot of money on new physical books because I had a lot of books on my TBR, so I was just kind of going through the books that I already had. This is another book that I purchased, I think, during that sale that I was telling you guys about. I have also seen this book like everywhere on like Book Talk, so I really wanted to see, after reading these, like this one and the Deadly Romantics, those were more of a lighter read for me. I was ready to kind of get back into a more serious book. And I usually do that, if you notice. So like I read The Four Winds, that was kind of like a deep, heavy book. Then I wanted to read something a little bit more lighthearted. That's kind of like how I pace my books. So The Way I Used to Be was such a good book, you guys. Trigger warning. It does come with a trigger warning for SA, and it was just really, really sad. It's actually a young adult book. I don't particularly enjoy young adult books, except for books like this that has a more that has an underlying message that, or theme, that is really, really important. So for this, it was eye-opening in the sense because it is young adult. So it was talking about a girl who was basically in her tweens going into her teens, and how she was SA'd at a very young age, and like what happened. So it was very graphic, and made my heart like skip multiple times reading through it, and I just could not imagine anybody going through that. I think the author did a really good job at like painting the scene, and you know, talking about like how gravely wrong wrong that is, right? And how it really messes up someone who was unfortunate enough or is unfortunate enough to have to experience something bad like that. So I really enjoyed it in the sense that it was very eye-opening. I think it's such an important book. It's really a book that should be read by a lot of people. Obviously, if this is something that is triggering to you, definitely do not read it. But it is such an important book, and I thought that the author did such a great job at elaborating the theme in a way that makes this an important conversation to be had. So I give this book a 5 stars. I'm actually currently reading the second part of this book right now, so I haven't finished that yet, but yeah, 5 out of 5. Okay, the next book that I read is The Psychology of Money. So this book was actually listened via audio, and this book is by Morgan Housel. I believe for this one I gave it a 3 stars. I gave it a 3 stars because it was very dry. Okay, so this was the book that I listened to after the 5 a.m. club. The 5 a.m. club was very cringy from a narration perspective. This one was very dry because it was actually narrated by the author itself. It has some really interesting lessons in here. I didn't really think that I learned too much from it. Like, I learned a few things, don't get me wrong, but I didn't find it particularly helpful for my own personal finances. So that's why I give it a 3 star. And I didn't really like the narration, so that's why I also gave it a lower rating as well. But I do think it's pretty good. I know that this book is highly recommended by a lot of people, so I'm not saying don't read the book. Maybe for me, I did not have a good experience with the book, but because of that, I needed to say definitely check it out if you are interested. I don't think that it's like a complete bore, not a complete waste of time, but for me, it wasn't the best book that I've read on money. All right, the next book that I read is, I remember reading this book specifically. It was also a Kindle book. It's called Layla by Colleen Hoover. I have read a lot of Colleen Hoover books. I used to love her until the whole It Ends With Us drama. I mean, I like her books, okay, don't get me wrong. And Layla has been on my TBR for a long time because I am trying to like read all of her books, right? So one thing I did not know about this book, again, I kind of went in blindly with my reading. I did not know that this was like a supernatural romance book as well. So when I first read it, I remember reading this like when I was on vacation. I was in Austria, I think, and then I read it through when I was in Croatia. I was telling my husband, I'm like, oh my god, like what is happening? Like, because literally, if you have not read a supernatural love book, you will find yourself saying that. So I thought it was really interesting in the sense because it was my first supernatural like book, and it was there were so many WTF moments in there. I'm like, what is going on? It's not cringy or anything. I don't think it was. At least to me, I didn't find it cringy, but I just definitely thought that it was really engaging and interesting because I've never read anything quite like it before. So I definitely do recommend it. It's about a story about like a woman and a guy, and they know each other from like previous, and then they kind of like got to know each other, and then something happened where I can't tell you. If I tell you, it's gonna give away the book. So I would say this, like, I do recommend reading it. I personally enjoyed it. So yes, that's all I have to say. Go get the book, go read it. And if you've read it though, let me know how you feel about this book. So, all right, the next book that I read was another Kindle book, and I also read this when I was on vacation in Europe. It was called The Guncle Abroad by Stephen Rowley. I enjoyed this book. I love this book. I love Stephen Rowley's books. I read The Guncle last year. Well, not last year, but like 2023. And it was one of my favorite books to this day. The first Guncle that I read, I actually read it or like listened to it via audio, and I loved it so much. Like, even the narration was just 5 out of 5 for me. So if you haven't read The Guncle yet, quickly, The Guncle is about this guy. His name is Patrick. He is an actor, and he was living in Palm Springs, California. One day he found himself in a situation where he had to take care of he had to become the caretaker of his niece and nephew because his niece and nephew's mom passed away, and he basically just fell in love with them, right? So this is the second installation of the book, where this time the kid's dad, right? So basically the widow, he was getting married, and so Patrick, Uncle Patrick, had to be the one to take care of the niece and nephew during this whole like wedding weekend, right? So there's a lot of things that kind of happen in that the wedding weekend. It's all set in Europe because it says here like Guncle abroad, and it was just a really cute, like light-hearted book, and I really did enjoy it. So if you are looking for another light read, perfect for like summer reading, I definitely do recommend checking that out. Okay, so the next book that I read, and I read to this or listened to it via audio, and it's called Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You guys, this book was phenomenal. It was amazing. I recommend listening to it, you guys, because the narration is also like chef's kiss. I believe this book was, it's not narrated by Julia Whelan. It was narrated by another person. If I can find the name, I'll put it right here. But she was amazing in this book. So if you didn't know, Taylor Jenkins Reid, her books, characters sometimes intertwine with one another. There's an overlap with her characters in all of her books, but the storyline itself is not overlapping. So this book is about Carrie Soto, who is a tennis player. She's a women's tennis player, and she was mentioned in Taylor Jenkins Reid's book Malibu Rising. In Malibu Rising, one of the characters was dating this tennis player Carrie Soto, right? So then now Carrie Soto has her own book, and you guys, I love this book. Why do I love this book? I love the whole tennis theme. I don't play tennis personally, but I actually do enjoy watching it on TV. And I just loved reading a sports book, surprisingly. It is a book about Carrie Soto and her dad's relationship. So her dad was actually her coach, and a lot of the back and forth between her dad and her when she was training to become like a champion, like a tennis champion, right? And she's actually a Latina descent woman, and her dad, you know, is Latin. I'm not sure from which country, but the narrator did such a great job with like the accents and everything. And you guys, it was so sad. Like, it was such a great book in the beginning, like how they have this like relationship, how the father really coached her to become this like tennis extraordinaire, and then when she got really big, she became very boastful and very egoistic. She kind of forgotten about her dad. And so it's kind of like that kind of story, and it was just so good. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend you checking it out if you haven't already. I gave it a 5 out of 5. All right, so the next book that I read is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I actually read this book, a physical book, but it's upstairs and I don't feel like getting it. And you guys, number one, I can't believe I actually read a fantasy book, and I actually really loved it. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I actually did enjoy that book. So to be completely honest, when I first read it, the first couple chapters were so slow. Like, maybe not even the first couple chapters. Yeah, the first couple chapters were so slow. And then I want to say like after 100 pages is when it really picked up for me, and I found myself really enjoying it. I love like the whole like love story behind it too, and I just loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, like I wish I'm being seduced by a fairy. But yeah, it was so good and kind of scary towards the end. But yeah, I thought it was really good. And as soon as I was done with this book, I actually ran out to Target to buy the second book. But the second book, I have not even touched it yet. But I will touch it soon. As soon as I'm done with the book that I'm reading right now, I'm probably going to start on the second book. But yeah, you guys, I really enjoyed this book. And for those of you who are fantasy readers, you guys probably know that this is a tried and true, and I hear that a lot of people loved the second book even more. So I am excited to get into the next book very shortly. All right, so the next book that I listened to is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And you guys, I love this book so much. This book was also listened via audio. I did a lot of audiobooks this year, you guys. I told you guys that. I really liked the book. Even though it's a romance book, it has a little bit of it has some depth to it, you know, because sometimes I feel like with romance books or like love stories, it's more so like the romance and like the lust and the sexual thing, but this one has a little bit more than the romance part, like the love part. There's like actual depth to it, and you guys have to read it. It's so good. It's actually one of my first Abby Jimenez's book, and I really loved her writing style. I loved her book, and so for that one I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 5 out of 5, so I definitely highly recommend. It's such a good book. Okay, so the next book that I read is actually this one. All right, is this book called The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. You guys, this book was so good. I actually did not pick this book myself, but this was a book that I read through book club at work. I am part of the AAPI ERG at my company, and every year they always have a book club. So this year we got this book, and I really enjoyed this book. So similar to the Kristin Hanna books, Lisa C actually writes a lot of historical fictions. This is actually her first book that I've ever read, and I really enjoyed it so much. This one specifically is about the Hanyo women of Jeju Island in Korea. The Hanyo women are women who are basically, they're like scuba divers. They're like deep sea divers who would harvest the ocean floors for wildlife or sea life to bring up as a form of food for everybody else. The Hanyo women were known to be the matriarch of the family. They're the ones who would go out and work for the family, whereas the husbands would stay at home to watch the kids, right? So it talks about how these women, they were groomed to be divers at a very young age, and there's a lot of tragic things that happen, you know, in the pursuit of becoming the diver. Obviously the ocean is not a safe place, so there are people's lives that have been lost during this very dangerous job. And this book specifically follows this one girl and like how she became a diver, and it's just such a good book. This one I really surprised myself as well, because similar to the Four Winds, I read this book in like 2 days, so like one whole weekend. It was such a page turner, and I really enjoyed it. Because of this book, I'm also really surprised. Lisa C is actually a Caucasian woman, so she's not even Asian, but the way that she wrote this book, it is highly researched, just incredible. And because of this book, I definitely do want to check out her other books as well. So a 5 out of 5, definitely recommend. All right, so the next book that I listened to, so this is an audiobook, is called Funny Story by Emily Henry. You guys, I am so sorry. I am not a Emily Henry fan. I literally gave this book a 2-star. I could not stand this book. Oh my gosh. I think this is probably my 3rd or 4th Emily Henry book, and every time I read her books, I always give her a chance. But I never seem to like any of her books. Although I have to say this one is the better book out of her other books. But I really did not enjoy it at all. Like, I think it was cute. But here's the thing with Emily Henry. I don't really like her writing style. I know that she's always praised for how beautiful she writes. I don't disagree that. I do agree that she writes beautifully. But for the storyline that she's writing, I think it just is too verbose for the kind of plot or the kind of storyline that she is writing about. So I didn't really find it too enjoyable, to be honest with you. And I actually listened this via audio as well. And I'm actually surprised too, because this book was narrated by Julia Whelan, and I thought that she was like the GOAT of narrators until I actually found out that the narrator for Here for the Summer, the Abby Jimenez book, and Carrie's Soto book, I thought those were Julia Whelan when I was listening to it, but then I realized like, oh, that's not Julia Whelan. This was read by Julia Whelan, and I just didn't like her voice in it. Her voice just don't do it for me. I feel like this book it has a more of a lighthearted tone to the overall writing style. The way she was narrating it just did not sound, it didn't suit the whole storyline. So I didn't really enjoy it. I gave it a 2-star. Nothing else to share about this book. Okay, so the next book that I read is Normal People by Sally Rooney. You guys, I purchased this book a while ago, but I finally picked it up and I thought it was an okay book. I thought this one was way better than the other Sally Rooney book that I read the year previous, which was Beautiful World, Where Are You? I just thought it was okay. Let's put it that way. I thought it was okay, but it was much better than the other book that I read, which was Beautiful World, Where Are You? So similar to Emily Henry, I feel like Sally Rooney's writing style is a little bit different. It is not really to my liking. I don't think she's American. If Sally Rooney is a woman, I'm not sure. I don't know if the author is American, so it's definitely not it's not written in American English, if you will, which is fine. It's actually not even a thick book, but it talks about the story of 2 friends, a woman and a guy, and they were childhood friends. The main character, I can't remember her name, Marianne. Okay, so Marianne is, they all grew up in this like small town in, I think it was like London or like somewhere around there, right? And the guy, his name is Connell, he happens to befriend Marianne. Marianne's kind of like a weird girl, but she's a daughter of wealthy parents, and she's not really popular in school, and she's not really pretty is what I was told. She's not like, she's just an average looking girl, so like not the best looking, but she is she wasn't really popular, didn't really have a lot of friends. And Connell is the opposite of her. His mom is a housekeeper. The housekeeper actually works at Marianne's parents' house, and he grew up with his single mom essentially, but he is the popular kid at school. Somehow him and her became friends and they formed a relationship with each other. They kind of like left to go to college, and then while they were in college they kind of like met up again, and like something's happened there. So to me it was just an okay book. I didn't really think that it was like the most amazing thing or anything like that, but that's the thing with like reading sometimes for me. I feel like sometimes I rush through my reading, so maybe I'm getting a totally different experience than other people are. But I see that it's a Hulu original series now, and I have Hulu, so maybe I should try watching this and see if I like the TV version better. But all in all, it was an okay book. I think overall I rated this 3 stars, 3 out of 5. Alright, so the next book that I read is an old book. It's called Best Friends Forever by Jennifer Weiner. I actually got this book from a book fair a couple years ago. Well, actually last year, so I wanted to read a book from that haul, and that's why this book is a little bit older. This book is also it probably came out like around 2000, like mid-2000s, I want to say. And it was really interesting. I actually really enjoyed that book. It doesn't really have a lot of good ratings on Goodreads, and that's the thing, I don't really follow Goodreads because I feel like people just inflate their ratings or like completely criticize a book so much. But I really enjoyed the book. It's a story about 2 friends. They grew up like really close to each other. They actually met because they are neighbors, or they were neighbors, and they kind of like separated as they like grew older, and they had a reunion in the town that they grew up in, so that's kind of like how they came together. But they didn't meet at the reunion. They actually met during the time when they had the reunion. One of the friends did not go to the reunion, but the other friend basically went back to go see her old best friend because something happened. There's like a mystery there that happened. So then they found themselves kind of like in a situation where they were trying to, like, they were rekindling their friendship, which was really interesting, and they were also trying to solve this like little issue or like this little mystery. So I thought it was really cute, and I really liked that there's a kind of like the mystery part of it too, and I liked that it's a story about 2 best friends essentially. And overall I really enjoyed this book a lot. I think for that one I actually rated it 4 stars C, so I really enjoyed that book. The last book that I read in the year 2024 or listened to is The Women by Kristin Hannah. So I read 2 Kristin Hannah books last year, and I had to read The Women because The Women was on my TBR for the longest time, and because I really enjoyed her other two books, which was The Four Winds and The Nightingale, I had to read The Women, and The Women was also so sad. It was so sad, you guys. But I think I kind of got annoyed with the character towards the end of the book a little bit, but I can understand why I got annoyed with her, and I feel bad for saying this, but essentially what the story is about a woman who was born in, like, she lived in the Coronado Islands, so like in California, so near San Diego. San Diego is like a huge, San Diego had a huge like military base. Her brother went to war essentially, and during this time there were no females who went to the Vietnam War. As people say, there are no females or no women in the Vietnam War. So one day her brother actually got killed in the war, and so she decided to go to war. She decided to serve the country, and it's a story about how she became a nurse helping in the Vietnam War. So she didn't actually fight the war, but there were actually a lot of women who were at war in this supporting type of roles, right? So she was a nurse, she was a combat nurse, and she suffered a lot in Vietnam, and it was just really intriguing to see how she went through her life as a combat nurse at war. Like, I cannot imagine living or going to war, honestly. And while she was there, she made friends with two other women as well, and she fell in love. Like any great stories do have, there's always a love story. So she fell in love, she's lost a few friends, etc. I can't tell you everything. And then she came back and she suffered PTSD, and that was so sad. So when she came back she suffered PTSD, and she basically lost it. The reason why she lost it mentally is because her parents, her dad especially, never acknowledged her contribution to the war, and that really messed up with her. So it talks about like how her life when she was at war and her life after war, like how that was equally painful as well. So all in all, it's just such a great book. Again, I've never really been into historical fiction, but nowadays I just love historical fiction because it really helps me see a different world that I am not familiar with at all. So if you have not read that book, I definitely do recommend. It was a 5-star for me. I cannot wait to read more historical fictions in the year 2025. Alright, so this is Editing Aza. I'm just popping in really quickly because I forgot to cover 2 of the books that I read. So the 20th book that I read for 2024 is Abby Jimenez, Part of Your World. So I picked this book up after I listened to the first Jimenez book for me, which was Just for the Summer, and I really enjoyed that book, so I wanted to read another one of her books as an audio version because I had a lot of Audible credits. So I decided to pick up the Part of Your World book. And I didn't realize that the Part of Your World book is actually part of 3-book series, and Part of Your World is the first book, just like The Summer is the second book, and then there's the third one. So even though I read the second book first, I wasn't completely lost. Abby Jimenez also does the same thing, just like Taylor Jenkins Reid, where her characters are kind of like overlapping in her books, but they can still kind of stand alone in their own storyline as well. So you don't have to read book number 1, 2, 3 in a consecutive order, because you can still know what's going on in each book. So that was really cool. And just like Just for the Summer, Part of Your World also is a love story, but it also has an underlying theme there that's a little bit more, it has a little bit more depth compared to any other romance books that I've read. I really did like that book. I preferred Just Like the Summer more, but definitely read Part of Your World after Just for the Summer, or Part of Your World first, then Just for the Summer, and I think that you would definitely enjoy the series. And the last book that I read in 2024 was actually my 21st book. So I was right, I did read 21 books last year. I confirmed it, and it was actually my first fiction audiobook of the year, and it's called On Lake by Ann Patchett, and this one was narrated by Meryl Streep. I love Meryl Streep in general, but the book was really long. I remember kind of like listening to it. It was a slow burner. It's not like it's not a bad book, it's just it's a very slow burn book, and I really enjoyed it. It's basically about a family that was stuck in their farm or their land, like the parents' land, during COVID. So it was during the pandemic. So the mom was actually a stage actress, and she was in a very, very famous play, and so she was kind of giving her daughters the tea on like what happened during her more glorious fun days. So it was a story centered around that, and the mom is Meryl Streep kind of telling the story to her daughters, and it was just so cool. I really, really enjoyed that perspective. But in terms of like an overall reading experience, I did think that it was a really long audiobook, and I liked it, but not so much to give it a 5-star in my opinion, because of how I thought that it was more of a slower build, and I kind of like a more fast-paced book, especially when I'm listening on audio. Audiobooks are really unique because sometimes if you find like the perfect narrator, sometimes the narration doesn't suit the book. So you have to find like the perfect narrator, the perfect storyline, and the perfect length, the perfect pace for it to be overall fully enjoyable. And so I didn't feel like I got all of those factors in this audiobook specifically, so I rated it, I think, about a 4-star, not completely a 5. So yeah, that's basically the last book that I read in 2024. I did end up reading 21 books. Now I'm gonna pop you guys back into the rest of the video. That's all of the books that I read in 2024. I think I had a pretty decent year. I did stick to my goal, which was a no buy book year, except for a couple of books. I did buy the Layla book and the Guncle book I bought the Guncle book and some book from the book fair, so like really cheap books, and I did buy the 2 fantasy books. But overall, most of the stuff that I have read in 2024 were books that were already in my TBR and books that I already owned, or credits that I already had on Audible that I needed to use up because I just had them. So all in all, a good year of reading. If you guys read any of the books that I've read, if you want to say anything, drop it in the comments below. If you have any recommendations on books I should read in 2025, let me know down below as well. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.